you were here last night, you would have been, I guess, just entering into that place of reflection of what the cross is all about. And what a great song that we've just sung, that, it is finished. It is done. And because of that, we can rejoice. We have hope. But as Matt also mentioned, it's so easy sometimes for us to rush to Sunday, is it not? To rush to the resurrection. So this morning, I just want us to spend some time reflecting again on what this cross symbolizes to us. In about 3 weeks' time, our country is going to take a moment to remember the sacrifice of so many young soldiers who gave up their life for our freedom. In fact, many young Australians go on a pilgrimage every year to Gallipoli, and the purpose is to connect with their family history and discover things about themselves that have been defined by the Anzac story. For us Christians, Easter leads us into a very similar pilgrimage, where we are invited to go back to Calvary, back to the sites and the events that define who we are as people of God. Today, we have arrived at a very crucial site of our Christian history, the cross. Good Friday is all about focusing on the cross and what it represents, the message it conveys to us and our loved ones, what we need to value and never, ever forget. But have you ever wondered why we refer to this day as Good Friday? This week at Scripture, one of my students, Charlotte, she's very vocal, and I've actually got a few of those girls in my class. I've got another one who's been telling me for weeks that we're running out of chocolate in this world. And then I woke up the other day on sunrise, and that was the headline, we're running out of chocolate. And I thought, wow. Her name is Holly. But Charlotte is the one that has a lot of questions. And last week while we were talking about Easter, she said to me, Misa, why do we call Friday Good Friday when it really should be called Sad Friday because Jesus died? That's a good question, right? It's a very good question. And I know I could have, and I did focus on the resurrection because I had 30 seconds before the bell went. So I quickly had to give her an answer of hope and, and of love and of joy. But when I went home and I started to ponder on that question and started to reflect on the events that took place that lead us to the cross, you know what? There is no happy moment in that story. If you were to just focus on the book of Matthew, you will notice that in chapter 26, we're dealing with the plot to kill Jesus. We're looking at how Judas agrees to betray Jesus. Then we move on to the Last Supper, where Jesus again talks about his death, and the disciples don't quite get it. Then Jesus predicts the denial of his best friend, Peter. And afterwards, we're taken to the Garden of Gethsemane, the place where Jesus felt forsaken by his Father. It doesn't end there though, does it? Because after the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus is arrested and treated like a criminal by the high priest. And finally we see Peter disowning Jesus 3 times. We don't even get a break when we get to chapter 27. Because the first thing that happens in chapter 27, the first thing that we are called to deal with is the suicide of Judas. What a heartbreaking moment for us as Christians. After spending 3 years with Jesus, Judas still didn't know the love of God. Judas didn't know that he was loved by God. There is no doubt in my mind that just like Jesus was able to forgive Peter, he could have forgiven Judas. But unfortunately, Judas did not get a chance to experience that. And so here we are facing this very heartbreaking moment in our Christian history where one of our brothers did not experience the love of God. But we don't even get a time to grieve that. Because then we're rushed to where Jesus is confronted by Pilate, where Pilate is talking to the people, and the people that once, a few weeks ago, were saying, "Yay, hail to the King of Jews, he's arrived," and are all excited, are now saying, "Crucify him and give me Barabbas." They traded an innocent man for a criminal. And it doesn't get any better, because we then have to deal with the fact that Jesus was mocked, beaten, crucified, and left to die on a cross for a crime he never committed. These are the events that lead us to the cross. These are the events that we're called to remember and never forget. This is the story behind Good Friday. So now I want to ask you a question. I want you to think about it. How do we then encourage one another to reflect on these events without rushing to Sunday? Because we know that Sunday is indeed a good day. If you have your Bibles, I would love for you to turn to 1 Peter 2, chapter 2, verse 9. I'm going to read from the Message Bible, but you'll be able to follow along. 1 Peter 2, verse 9. But you are the ones chosen by God, chosen for the high calling of priestly work, chosen to be holy people, God's instruments to do his work and speak out for him, to tell others of the night and day difference he made for you. From nothing to something, from rejected to accepted. This is what we're invited to engage with on Good Friday. To remember and never forget how in this dark moment in our Christian history, God's purpose was being achieved. And I'm not just referring to the resurrection here. I am referring to the events that took place just moments after Jesus said, "It is finished," and then bowed his head and gave his spirit up to the Lord. Go to Matthew. Matthew 27:45, verses 54. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing heard this, they said, "He's calling Elijah." And immediately one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him." And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those with him were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." What a very encouraging and comforting passage. I know it sounds weird to say that, but here is a moment where Jesus is vulnerable, where he's honest about how he's feeling. And he's basically confessing to all of us, "I felt abandoned at that moment by my Father." Through his vulnerability, we're actually invited to be vulnerable with God as well. To not see it as a weakness, but to actually see it as an opportunity for God to love us and engage with us. An opportunity for us to realize that our feelings are never dismissed by our Father. Instead, he hears them and he listens and he pauses and he reassures us of his love. I love that, and I am so grateful for that. But Matthew doesn't just want us to know that Jesus felt this way. You see, the phrase, my God, why have you forsaken me?" actually comes from Psalm 22. And as you know, the book of Matthew is all about writing to a Jewish audience who have been very familiar with the Hebrew Bible. And so they knew the context of this verse. And if you read Psalm 22, which I encourage you to do so when you get home, you will notice that Psalm 22 is actually a statement of faith. One where the psalmist experiences God's goodness while enduring a very dark season in his life. Think about that for a moment. Jesus is not just being vulnerable with us when he quotes Psalm 22 verse 1. He's choosing a psalm which by the end ends in praise and thanksgiving, urging us to have the faith that is able to face suffering. A faith that says, like Jesus, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." A faith that says, like Jesus, "It is finished." A faith that says, like Jesus, "And I know that all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." All things. The crucifixion, the betrayal, the suicide, the denial, all things God works for the good of those who love him. Are we open to receive that message today? Are we open to say to Jesus, "I'm going through a dark moment right now, but I know that all things will work out for the good of those who love you"? Take a moment right now to reflect what you are going through. What dark valley are you facing? Are you open to receive such a faith? The story of Easter, though, doesn't end there. The story of Good Friday doesn't end there. As Jesus died, we see several amazing things happen. And here's where we see God's sovereignty over everything that took place on that cross, over that dark moment. God is still sovereign. And if you look at verse 51, you see that the curtain in the temple is torn. That curtain used to divide us from God. It used to create a space where we were not good enough to enter into his presence. The minute that curtain was torn, you know what? Anyone here who believes in Jesus can come forward to the Father. There is nothing that is holding you back anymore. You have a choice to enter into his presence if you want to. What a good news, right? That's good news. That's worth being called Good Friday, is it not? Let's never forget this moment in our Christian history when that veil was torn and we can now enter into the presence of God. But it doesn't end there. If you look at verses 54 and 56, we find two responses to the death of Christ. The first is by the centurion, and the second one is by women standing some distance away. The centurion man in verse 54 is the one who, after seeing all the events, seeing the earthquake, seeing noticing that something was going on in the temple, seeing that, there are dead people kind of like, coming up. He's like, there's something going on here. There's something more here, something divine that is taking place. I can't explain it. So surely, this was the man. This was the Son of God. Imagine that. The centurion, a Roman soldier who was in charge of taking care of the crucifixion, who was probably aware of all the events that took place before the crucifixion. He was responsible to some extent to what was taking place to our Lord. And yet he goes from being an unbeliever to becoming now a believer who's testifying who Jesus is. He's saying this was the Son of God. Is that good news? It is good news, is it not? This is why it's Good Friday. This is something that we need to remember and never forget. But there's more. In verses 55 and 56, we read this. Many women were there, watching from a distance, and they had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Among them was Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. during this very dark event, I wonder how they felt. They had followed him from Galilee. They had served him. They had been part of his ministry to him. They had heard him tell all those parables, and they have seen so many miracles. And there they are at the cross, grieving, crying, disappointed, heartbroken, wondering what was the purpose of all those 3 years. But I love the way that the love that Jesus had for these women had created in them a space in their hearts that allowed them to not be quenched by the darkness that was around them. That allowed them not to feel just totally disappointed and just cave in. Because instead of running away, just like all the other disciples did, if you read the Bible, John is the only one that's at the cross with a bunch of women. All the other disciples ran away. It was too much for them. But they didn't. They were courageous. There was something in them that said, no, we've got to be there to the very, very end, and I am not moving. They didn't care what the soldiers thought of them. They didn't care what the Pharisees thought of them. They were there to the very end. Something in them was saying, no, I'm not going to give up on him. They didn't know that Sunday was coming. So something else was going on inside their hearts. I often wonder if this is the reason why it was the women who were the first ones to see Jesus alive. They were the last ones there at the cross. They were the first ones on Sunday morning. I don't know. But what I do know is that this is a great example of loyalty and devotion to God. It's so easy to follow God and to be loyal to him when life is going great. But when darkness comes, and it will come, God still wants us to remain loyal and devoted to him. So let's never ever forget these women. Let's never forget their faith that can inspire all of us to stand firm even when a dark cloud comes around us and we can't explain it and we don't know where it's leading. Is that something good? Is that good news for Good Friday? Yes, it is. It's good news. As you can see, there are a lot of events that took place after the death of Jesus that we are so often, tempted to miss or just, look over and rush to Sunday. But the reason that we have Sunday, the reason why Sunday is such a wonderful, victorious day, and we will celebrate that on Sunday, is because of Good Friday. It's because of everything that Good Friday teaches us. It's a moment when darkness seems to have won, but then the light of God shines through, and we have victory in him. This morning you probably have noticed that there's some stuff there at the foot of the cross. It's a bit weird, I know. Well, sometimes we all carry stuff, right? We all carry burdens. Maybe we're heartbroken. Maybe there's disappointment. Maybe we're going through a very dark valley right now. And again, it's so tempting for us as Christians to do this. Put it in our pocket and pretend that it's not there. And not only that, pretend that Jesus can't see it. But Jesus sees everything. And when he died on that cross, when he sacrificed his life for us, it was for one of the purposes was for us to be able to come to him and place that on the cross and say, God, I can't carry this burden anymore, but I know that you can. So I'm going to take you up on that invitation and I'm going to put it on the cross. And I'm going to wait patiently to see you turn this into victory. I want us to take a moment right now. A moment to remember everything that Christ has done for us on this Good Friday. And I want to invite you to come forward and grab one of these very filthy pieces of cloth that we have here. And I don't know what it represents for you. And that's okay. I don't need to know that, because God does. And I just want to encourage you to place it on the cross. However you want. You can tie it up. You can maybe tie it around here. It doesn't matter. But just take this opportunity to hand it over to Him on this day, Good Friday. Thank you.